Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
Innovative Thinkers, episode number 311. Innovative Thinkers.
Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black entrepreneur experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards, an activist dedicated to assisting others with disabilities and chronic illness reach their full potential with his foundation, Pieces of Me. Welcome, Daniel Hodges.
Dr. Richards, it's great to be with you this morning. Thank you for having me.
I've given our audience such a brief bio. Why don't you fill in the gaps and share with our audience what you'd like them to know about you and your foundation?
Well, thank you. Well, I always start with, at the time of this recording, I am a recent law grad, graduated earlier in the summer of 2021. And while I was in law school, my cousin and I started this nonprofit Pieces of Me Foundation to help others with disabilities and chronic illness. I was born blind. I have some other conditions as well, including chronic pain, anxiety, etc. And I had really seen, both within my own life and the lives of many loved ones, how even within the existing infrastructure, so many people were falling through the cracks. They just weren't getting what they needed, not only to get by, but certainly not getting what they needed in order to thrive and to participate in society to the fullest degree possible. And so I think one of the easiest way to explain what we do or our approach to life is we're not just looking at inclusion from the perspective of how do we bring people in, but we're also looking at inclusion from the perspective of the power that it has to really help people fly as high as they're able to fly, which for any of us is much higher than we realize, and the way that we can all help each other move forward if we get rid of some of these barriers, both internally and externally, that keep us down. I was someone who had a lot of negative expectations placed before me throughout my entire life, particularly in childhood and young adulthood. And I remember these things now as I've had some successes in life, not to dwell on them, but to remember where I came from and remember that is where a lot of people still currently are, so that the relatability stays in place, so that I can be a more powerful advocate and meet people where they are, regardless of their circumstances, and really start to help them reach that next plane that they are going for. Because when we're all able to succeed according to our needs and desires, everybody benefits.
You talk about inclusiveness. Talk about that and having a disability and going through law school.
So there were a few different angles. When we were doing things in law school, there were some accessibility things. Was the textbook accessible? Could we get it converted to an electronic format that my iPad could use as the screen reading software to read? Sometimes the books were easily converted. Sometimes the publishers actually didn't want to play well with others. You had to go through and train professors on how to make sure that what they're putting on the whiteboard is getting relayed verbally. And most of them were really, really good with that. Actually quite eager to be accommodating, or really, in our parlance, to make sure that their classroom was universally accessible. And then you have the questions both outside and inside. Can somebody with chronic pain or chronic fatigue meet the standards of what it means to be a lawyer? The law is traditionally a profession that we think of as being extremely demanding, both intellectually and physically. You think of long hours, you think of rigor, you think of a lot of things. And unfortunately, societally, we still associate chronic pain and chronic fatigue as being signs of weakness, even though they're not. There were a lot of barriers I had to get through within my own mind. And there were a lot of times we had to have very difficult discussions of, if I can't walk as well as I would like to that day, if I can't move my hands as well as I would like to that day, what is the minimum for me getting to class? What is the minimum for me typing up things and still being on a par with my peers, but also being true to my body? And we came out at the end, I think, in a good place, but it was definitely a learning experience for all involved. I think even some of the admin that I worked closely with would tell you that it was a learning experience for them as well.
And congratulations on your graduation.
Thank you.
What problem exists in the world today that you would like to solve?
Right now, I'll give you an example. We have an employment rate among the blind that is somewhere in the 20 to 25% range, give or take. We have an employment rate among individuals with disabilities that is sub 20%. That is reflected in inclusion overall. If you want to volunteer, many organizations will actually balk, is it worth bringing this person in? What will they require for access? Is it going to just be more hassle than it's worth? If you want to go to school, can you learn? What can you learn? What's it going to take? How much? Again, what's a reasonable accommodation given the law? At the very core of it, though, if you're looking at healthcare, if you're looking at education, housing, there are certain misconceptions that are there. There is one misconception that says creating universal access is more hassle than it's worth. It's not. There's a misconception that says people with disabilities are not able to contribute as much as our non-disabled peers. Again, not true. But until we get past mainly those two misconceptions, both within society at large and honestly within ourselves, you can't really address all of the litany of different external categories to a degree that really makes the impact that we would like.
Advice you wish you had followed.
I'm going to go back to a conversation you and I had years ago. And as you tried to push me as a mentor and said, you are capable of so much more. Here are all these things that you have talents in. And it took me years to get past my own doubts and really start asking myself what I wanted to do rather than what I thought I was capable of given the box I had placed myself in. I finally figured that out closer to when I started law school, but man, I wish I would have followed that advice years prior.
Daniel, I want you to talk to someone in our audience, and the person is listening, and they may have a child that is faced with disabilities, or they themselves are faced with disabilities. Maybe they were born with them, maybe they developed them later in life. So I want you to have this conversation, and perhaps the conversation is different if you were a non-disabled person and now you're disabled. Or you will tell us, being the expert, if the conversation is the same.
I think a lot of people believe it is much harder if you acquire a disability in adulthood or later in life. I think there's this loss of what you thought you were going to do and how you thought you were going to do it that has to be honored and worked through in order to get to that next stage in life. I mean, I can sit here and tell you that whatever happened does not change your destiny to the degree that your life is now hopeless. It doesn't. But I also have to say, there's a process there. There's a process of realizing that it's going to be okay, and yet that what you're going through is very difficult. And that is not the message that is often enforced. If I'm being quite blunt, the medical system and the medical model of disability, despite the many heroic doctors and nurses who are out there doing their best to take care of us, the medical model of disability is quite harmful. And that is often where someone who is transitioning into a disability finds themselves at first. You find yourself getting injured or losing your vision or whatever the case may be. And from a medical standpoint, your body is no longer doing what it was once capable of doing. That's a medical fact. However, the impact on your potential goes far beyond whatever happens in that exam room. Learning alternative techniques, learning how to tap into your other gifts and talents, that is a conversation that happens beyond the doctor's office. And I think that's where the ball often gets dropped. So in short, what I would say is, regardless of what you're going through, what you've been through, you still have gifts and talents to offer. You still have potential that is untapped, that you have the capability of tapping into. And for anyone, regardless of whether they were born with a disability, whether they've acquired it, it's a gradual process for everyone. I learn pretty much every day something new about how I can get past my own internal doubt, my own internal struggles, and be a more successful human, let alone advocate. And I think that's the process for everyone.
Talk about, I know you're an advocate and an activist for individuals with disabilities or chronic pain. When we look at the job applications and they ask extensive questions about disability, where you sit at the table as a person, president of a foundation, and you've experienced that whole paradigm of going through life with a disability. Is that information that they're asking, is it helpful or harmful?
It has the potential to be both or either. And really the determining factor is going to be, if you're in the employer seats, are you willing to set aside your own biases, because we all have them, and your own assumptions, because again, we all have them, regarding how a particular job or task can be performed up to your standards, and allow us to show, to demonstrate, to explain how we would go about performing that task adequately by using means that maybe fall beyond your expertise. An example here is lawyers do a lot of reading. Lawyers have to be able to absorb a lot of material, synthesize what is useful, and then convey it back to either the client or the judge or the other members of your firm, whoever, in a cohesive, concise, and understandable manner. That's really the core of the job in a lot of ways. Now, whether I get that material from Braille or from a document on a screen that my iPad using VoiceOver reads back to me, or from reading print, really isn't particularly relevant given the circumstances. You can make an argument, maybe, okay, you have to convert to documents and we get into accessibility there. But really, the core of the job is, can you read? Can you synthesize? Can you communicate it back? And if I'm applying for a job as a lawyer, that's what I have to be able to say, look, this is how I do this. And the employer has to say, okay, I've never used this software. I've never absorbed information in this manner, but I'm going to be open-minded enough to realize how you do it. Not only is it similarly efficacious, it may actually be more efficacious than reading print, because I'll tell you, given a chance, you'd be amazed how quickly some of us can process through material without relying on print. So I think, just getting back to your question, employers are better served, actually, if they set aside their assumptions and really approach this with an open mind, because finding the best candidate means finding the best candidate who can perform what are the real requirements of the job, not the best candidate who fits within a certain box based on preconceived notions.
Daniel, I want you to have a monologue, and I want you to name this person, living or not, and they have been so instrumental in your life and your life journey. Name the person, and what are you saying to that person?
So when I was really evaluating where I was going to take my life in 2017 regarding which direction I was going to go and how to proceed, I had two mentors who did not know each other within a couple of days of each other. You were one, and someone else I was working with through a different mentorship program was the other. And both of you within a couple of days really challenged me to set aside my own assumptions. So to my other mentor, Elisa, I would say that I am really grateful that you challenged me to re-examine my own potential and my own capabilities, to give myself the grace to thrive and figure out, even though it was messy at quite a few junctures, how to get to that next plane, especially given your lack of knowledge a few months prior as we first met each other. You were learning about blindness and about the history of the disability movement for the first time, yet somehow you managed within that few short months to become one of the best non-disabled allies I've ever seen because of your desire to learn and then your willingness to challenge me on my own dark spots. So thank you, and thank you for empowering me to make the impact that I hope to make and to spread the message that I hope to spread.
Who is Daniel Hodges and what matters to Daniel?
I am a lot of things. I'm a father of three very special children. Depending on the day, you can define special. No, I love all of my kids. They've taught me a lot. I am a person of faith. I am someone who is very inquisitive and really leans into being a lifelong learner. I am someone who has many, many interests and loves to tap into people who have gifts and talents and knowledge other than what I have, because there's so much out there to learn. And there's so many things that we can bring back into ourselves as we get to know people who think or feel or experience life or believe differently than we do.
What have you not done in life that you dream about often that you would like to do?
Well, I've traveled all over this country. I've never traveled internationally. I would love to do that. I'd like to get into different kinds of work. I'd like to put my books together that I've had ideas in my head for years on. I think there's a lot of work in the advocacy space I would still love to do. There's a lot of just really getting out and learning and experiencing life that I would still like to do.
Talk about legacy when it's all said and done. How do you want to be remembered?
I think when it's all said and done, I want to be someone who has really challenged and, dare I say, inspired, and that's a tricky word in our movement, but inspired in a positive way, people, regardless of their characteristics, to take a step back to really examine how they view one another and how they view themselves so that they were able to really elevate one another and just create a positive tidal wave that outlasts any of us and just keeps growing as it continues to build momentum and ripples beyond any of us.
Talk about your ideal client that you service for your nonprofit.
I think we have two. I think one is the person I was speaking of earlier, especially the person who is struggling to adapt within themselves or within their circumstances with a new set of characteristics and is looking for that spark of hope to be able to reclaim their life and to reclaim their identity and will hopefully ultimately embrace all of who they are and realize that one set of characteristics does not define them and can then go on and thrive. That's client number one. Client number two is the person who does not identify as having a disability, but wants to be a better ally. We've put a lot of effort and a lot of resources into creating a space where people can learn not just what not to do, but I think far more importantly, what to do and how they can leverage their positive desires to make a positive impact.
What can we do right now to support your foundation?
Well, the easiest thing is we are on all of the various socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. Like our page, follow, share your stories, share your questions. This should be a place of learning. For those who are able to give either volunteer time or financially, we're a young nonprofit. We're trying to, as it were, keep the lights on. So we're always appreciative of that and in need of that. But I think at the end of the day, Pieces of Me Foundation was always designed for, or with the idea in mind, that this is a place where everyone has something to give and everyone has something to receive. Everyone has something to learn, but everyone has a nugget of wisdom or an insight or even a stimulating question that is going to contribute to the overall fabric of the nonprofit. So I just want anyone out there who's listening and wants to be involved to realize it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. Yes, you're welcome. Yes, you're needed. And yes, you have something that we are really looking for to contribute, regardless of your circumstances or your characteristics.
Daniel, there are so many brands or businesses that are dominating. Talk about a brand or business that's dominating that you admire and why.
One of the ones I really admire is Salesforce, because I am an investor and I have noticed how many times the CEO has been on shows that I watch talking about how important not only DEI is to them, but how important giving back to the community is, even as a for-profit business. They're sending plane loads of supplies all over the world and such. And I think where business does have such a capacity to do good, not just for the bottom line for the shareholders or the executives, but for the world at large, I think they're a great example of that.
Daniel, what is your zone of genius?
My zone of genius is connecting people and ideas in innovative and creative ways. I have always had this knack, and I've really started to lean into it, of I can meet a couple of people from different areas of my life and say, wait a minute, these are people who may not know each other, who may not have necessarily picked each other out of a lineup, but they're going to hit it off for this one particular thing, and just creating that spark. And then also saying, here's this idea and here's that idea, and we're working on these in isolation, and saying, well, wait a minute. Actually, these ideas have this underpinning. Let's go for that and let's exploit it and let's make it an integral part of the process and going forward.
What is your weakness as an entrepreneur?
Ironically enough, it is asking for money and really allowing my team to give it their full potential. I think oftentimes with the latter, it's being so cognizant of people's time that I forget how much they enjoy and how willing they are to give up their time and serve because they believe in what we're doing too. And I think in the mission, or in the sense of getting money, it's, I, along with a lot of my peers, have spent so much of our lives trying to bootstrap things and trying not to be a quote unquote charity case, that I have to overcome some serious psychological barriers when I'm trying to say, hey, this idea is worth investing in. It's worth you parting with some of your money for, because it's that good, and because I, as a leader, am onto something without triggering a traumatic response within my own brain.
What is the best decision you've made as a leader?
Really, really leaning into servant leadership. Just doubling down on this idea that I am blessed to have every one of my team members and trying to meet them where they are, seeing them for who they can become, and allowing them to prove me right.
Talk about raising capital and starting your nonprofit. How did you raise the capital to start?
A lot of it was smaller donations from friends, classmates, etc. on a GoFundMe. Some of them have given a couple of times. Most of them were single donations, $25, $50, maybe $100. One awesome classmate dropped in $500, which, man, I was dancing around the room. But it's been small donations that have just really come together to allow us to at least get this off the ground.
Talk about mental health and managing your nonprofit.
So this is a double-edged sword. I came into the nonprofit world needing something that was impactful and that was beyond me for the sake of my mental health. I was way too self-absorbed in my own insecurity when I started Pieces of Me back in 2019. So this has been literally a godsend in that way. Now, that being said, entrepreneurship is hard. There have been many sleepless nights. There have been many times where I have felt completely inadequate for the task, and I've had to work through those anxieties. Can I keep this going? Am I even the right person for this job? Does the market want what we are doing, et cetera, et cetera? And so I have to be very cognizant of that. I have to check in with myself at least daily, if not more frequently, because running a nonprofit, running a social venture in general, has a tremendous potential to do good. There are moments where I feel on top of the world for some of the things I see happening, but that's not a given. And you have to also prepare yourself for those moments where it does get hard and you wonder if that next door is going to open.
Talk about business continuity. What is your highest risk as a business owner?
I think the biggest risk at this point is just not being able to secure funding and not being able to really prove to the market what we're capable of doing.
Look over the last 30 days, Daniel. What was your greatest win?
Actually, I'm going to look toward even just the last 24 hours. We were starting to stagnate a little bit, getting into the giving season. And I was actually a bit concerned going into the board meeting we had last night at the time of this recording. And something in the air shifted again. And I just gave my team the room to breathe and the room to dream, and the energy came back. And we came back alive. And we actually had so much positive energy rolling and so much momentum that we had to schedule a second meeting for tomorrow evening so that we could really dive into this and kickstart things. So it was so uplifting to see my team come back and say, no, we believe in this. We're going to really invest our time twice in 1 week into decently long meetings so that we can really lean into the end of the year and make all of our dreams come true.
How do you celebrate your wins?
Probably not as well as I should. I certainly let my team know, and we talk about them, we relish in them, but at the same time, I think it's like with an athlete or a musician or other kinds of performers or business people. You can celebrate your win for a moment that you realize the next day is a new battle, and you have really celebrating a win makes sure that you're able to capitalize it and create a winning streak out of that one win.
What do you need right now that you don't have to move the needle forward?
Well, like most, I think, small businesses or nonprofits would tell you, the first thing is money. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's true. We're operating on very tight capital. We're not able to do what we would want. We're not able to hire the people we would want to simply because the money isn't there. I think the other is just really getting our community engaged? Can we build our community, and can we get people not only just following us, but actively participating in creating or co-creating that positive energy with us that really starts getting the rock rolling downhill?
The word is listening. What is that resounding sound or message that your generation is saying that we should be listening to?
I think my generation, by and large, is saying, let's stop trying to make people fit into an archetype that serves almost no one. And let's start putting the spotlight back on each individual human, see them as the gift that they are, and embrace them as the individual that they are, and then get rid of whatever barriers lay between them and their potential so that we can just unleash the power of humanity. I think that's the message that comes through our generation, and this ties directly into that.
Who are your top two influencers and what lessons did they teach you?
One of them is, and I've got many of them, but one of them is, we were talking before we started recording about LeBron James, who I've got to give a shout out to as being a fellow Ohioan, who everybody knows him for being the amazing athlete that he is, arguably the best there's ever been in the sport of basketball, or at least one of the top couple. And yet we don't often talk about the things he's done for Northeast Ohio philanthropically, but also the things that he's done, such as the TV series The Wall, where it's, promoting finding people that are doing good in the world and figuring out how to give them the financial security it requires to help them really fulfill their personal missions. So I look at that. And then I also look at someone like Marcus Lemonis, who we've talked about in our previous conversations, who actually in his recently released podcast episodes has talked much more openly about his previous mental health struggles, which most men don't find the social space to do, and talked about even his struggles with suicidality, and putting that in the context of an extremely successful businessman, someone who on the screen appears brash and confident and ready to lift people up, but also doesn't take any fluff. But yet then you also get to learn about this other side of him, and you're able to say, well, wait a minute, that's true. These things are not mutually exclusive. You can be strong and independent and really able to make a positive impact, and yet still have a history or even a current circumstance where you struggle with your mental health. Mental health is not a sign of weakness. I really appreciate that someone like him has gone out and really attacked that narrative that these things are separate, instead of really saying you can. And oftentimes, if you're someone who struggles with mental health, often are someone who is strong and powerful, and yet has this circumstance that you have to navigate through.
Talk about your most memorable moment in life or business.
I'm actually not sure. I think I'll give you an example here, which is in 2018, when we had fought for a year to get vocational rehab to approve me going to law school. This is the state agency that uses federal funds, who is specifically meant to help people who are blind or otherwise disabled get the job that they're supposed to get. That's literally their government mandate. And we had fought for a year to get funding that I was legally entitled to. And that moment after the appeals, after the struggle, after taking the leap of going to Baltimore without knowing how in the world I was going to make it all work, 3 weeks or 4 weeks away from orientation, and that email hits my inbox and it says, we have reversed our previous decision. You are going to be able to get funding from the state of Missouri that you were otherwise entitled to. Not quite how they phrased it, but it's the way it was. and come into the office, we'll sign the plans, and that effectively opened the doors wide open for me to go to law school and really shine. I think that was the moment where my faith in that particular instance especially was rewarded, and the leap of faith paid off.
Congratulations, and thanks for sharing that story.
Thank you.
A lot of us, we don't like to talk about redos. If you had to do it all over again, talk about a moment that you would redo and why.
I'm going to go back to 2005 and 2006. This was when I was going to a university in Idaho. It's my first time through undergrad, and I started to experience significant mental health issues. I was quite depressed. I was having anxiety that was just really suffocating me. And I was seeking a therapist. I was trying a slew of different medications and nothing was working. And I had let maybe one or two people in my university know a bit about what was going on, but not to the degree I wish I could have as I look back. And what ended up happening was I ended up actually failing out of my last semester of undergrad just because I literally did not have the strength or the stamina to get out of bed most days, and let alone go attend class or to be able to perform academically. And yet I also wasn't able to and didn't really know how to go to disability student services and say, look, this is the medications I'm on. This is what's happening, and help. And it turned out okay, because I ended up getting into Western Governors University and getting on the path I'm at now. But it really was rather eye-opening just to see, looking back, how much I could have used help and the impacts that those decisions had on my transcript, because I'll tell you, that's not a fun thing to try to explain when you're applying for law school.
We like to have an attitude of gratitude. And I want you to finish this sentence. Thank you, pandemic, because
it has opened the door for businesses, especially, to really reevaluate what performing a job looks like. There are things like remote working and virtual work and such, flexible hours, etc., that people within the disability rights community have been trying to secure as possible quote-unquote accommodations for years. And what it took was the pandemic and these things being mainstreamed for businesses to say, wait a minute, in most cases, this actually does work. And this actually does free up a lot of working capital within our employees to go do their jobs well. I think that has been one of the blessings that has come out of the pandemic.
Daniel, if you conducted this interview, what is the one question you would have asked yourself? I want you to ask the question and answer it.
I think the one thing left that I want to get into is, why do we name our nonprofit Pieces of Me, and why do we spell it PEACES? And the answer is reflecting that reality that we, regardless of our characteristics, are not broken or incomplete. What brings us to that place of empowerment is embracing all of who we are and leaning into that. And so that's why we spelled PEACES as an inner peace, or a fullness of peace, rather than PIECES, which would imply that something is missing. So it's a play on words with a very powerful undertone.
We've come to the part of our interview. It's called Fun Facts Lightning Round, and I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to give me very quick answers. If there's something you desire not to answer, feel free to say pass. Are you ready for the lightning round, Fun Facts Lightning Round?
Yes, and I'll try to forget my legal training that makes anything hard to answer quickly.
Your first job.
Sales associate at Walmart.
Your favorite color.
Blue.
The last movie you saw.
I actually watched the movie Clouds a few weeks ago.
You relax doing what?
Reading or listening to music.
Your favorite singer or rapper.
Oh man, how do I pick one? You know what? It's getting close to holiday season, and I would love to go see Trans-Siberian Orchestra again. So we'll go with that.
Your favorite dance song.
Man, if I try to dance, I'll probably dislocate something again. I think I'm going to have to pass on that.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Oh, I love me some tacos.
Your favorite month.
I really enjoy April because it's the start of baseball season.
Work out or hit the couch?
I love to work out. Sometimes my body doesn't let me.
Daniel Hodges, thank you so much for joining us on Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast. Before we let you go, why don't you share with our audience the best way for them to connect with you and to do business with you and to support Pieces of Me Foundation? And feel free to leave all of your social media handles.
Absolutely. So I sent the social media handles in. By all means, please reach out if you want to collaborate, if you want to learn more, if you want to even just tap into what inclusivity and accessibility looks like within your business or your circumstances. By all means, reach out. My LinkedIn handle is there, and it's a great way to get a hold of me. And I believe my email will also be in the show notes. So yeah, I would love to get in touch, and I would love to co-create some good with anyone in your audience.
Thank you, Daniel. That's a wrap.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.